Living Corporate is brought to you by Textio. Today's top talent is everywhere, representing everyone, and our work environment should reflect the level of inclusion to meet that standard. Textio achieves this in building more equitable company cultures through the language we use in our job postings. That culture is formed one hire at a time, making the words we use to reach more diverse candidates all the more important. Our advanced language insights and employer brand content is what drives our mission of inclusion. Through our industry-leading application of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're able to widen companies' reach in finding and building upon the very diverse talent that empowers a culture of belonging. Every door should be open to every qualified job seeker. Again, that's Textio.
All right. Good evening and welcome to the Access Point. It is always a pleasure to join you on these Thursdays. I hope you've had a wonderful week so far and that you're enjoying great weather wherever you may be, whatever great weather looks like for you. Tonight we are discussing the show topic is title is Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery. This is an in-depth conversation around mental health, wellness, and navigating corporate spaces from a place of strength. I am Lonnie Morris, one of your hosts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing tonight. Excuse me. We are the Access Point, part of the Living Corporate Network. And Living Corporate is a digital media network consultancy focused on workplace equity and inclusion. Living Corporate centers and amplifies Black and Brown voices in the workplace through digital media production and business-to-business consulting. Our network offers a variety of programming, and tonight we're excited that you get to be with us for a show that we love so much, The Access Point. The Access Point is a weekly webinar focused on preparing Black and Brown college students and early career professionals for the workforce by having real, nuanced talks you may not even know you need to have yet. And for this Thursday, we are focusing more closely on the real challenges that you, our listeners, and some of you might be our viewers later, are facing as you move through the early stages of your career. A short disclaimer: the thoughts and views expressed in tonight's discussion do not reflect the views of any organization, the host, or the guests with whom the host or guest may be affiliated. So now I want to do introductions. We start with my amazing co-host, Dr. Wendy Edmonds.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Wendy M. Edmonds, and I am a professor, author, and management consultant. And you know what? I realize that your job is your treasure chest and of all kinds of people. I help you navigate that space and separate the gems from the counterfeit. I specialize in understanding toxic followership. Why do people follow bad people?
I promise every time I hear you say that, I think, man, I needed you in my life so many years. Why have I followed so many bad people? And I am your other co-host, Dr. Lonnie Morris, and I am a management consultant and professor. And I spend my time helping experienced professionals understand how to unpack organizational challenges and build better workplaces. My job is to help you hate your job less. This week, we have two amazing guests who are joining us for this conversation. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have Kendall Peel. Why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kendall Peel. I am a Master of Counseling Psychology. I am a professor, assessor, researcher, lover of travel and self-care. I am fully focused on helping people mitigate through crises such as work, personal, or even just general crises, go through their day-to-day lives by establishing self-care plans that help them to be efficient and effective in their everyday life. And I am so excited about tonight's conversation. It is going to be awesome.
Thank you so much, Kendall. And our other amazing guest is Mr. Bobby Frazier.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am a 2-year retiree from the Maryland State Health Department. Been in senior management for about 25 years in supervising staff, primarily of which the majority of my staff were women. And my staff was made up of baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Z, and it's been an exciting ride.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frazier. And I want to let you tell us a little bit more about that, because you were working specifically in a department that's really important to what we're talking about today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I work for the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And in the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, there it's made up of public health, mental health, and public health insurance. And there are 24 local health departments which provide full service care to the citizens of those jurisdictions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So welcome
Yeah.
to both of you. Excited for this conversation. I think we're going to dig right in. So let's start here. I think that this idea of mental health, while it's important, it may be a little nebulous to people, right? It feels like it's the buzzword right now and it's a trending topic. So tell us, what is it that we're talking about when we're saying we need to understand mental health and work on that in the workplace? And why is it a big deal? Kendall, why don't you start for us?
So, as far as mental health now becoming a trend, I think it's to do with just the day and age that we live in. We live in such a social media based aspect of things, to the point in which it is becoming a part of triggering and affecting mental health. So, when we're speaking about mental health, we're talking about your overall emotional, psycho, and even cognitive health. This has a lot to do with how you are processing your thoughts, your feelings, how you react, how you don't react. It also has a lot to do with the aftermath that comes from that. This is where a lot of people discuss trauma and the aftermath that comes from such. So when you are discussing that, you're really wanting to overlook how it is that you manage your mental health. So that has to do with what are you doing to increase your cognitive health, your psychological health, as well as your emotional health, because you can do emotional exercises, which a lot of people don't know. So it's important for you to see the overall aspects, because a lot of people seem to think that mental health, because of trend, it means something of a higher crisis, or it means someone who may be going through a breakdown per se. But really, mental health is your overall thought process, how you feel, and how you overall conduct yourself, knowing what you know and what it is that you've been through.
Kendall, you say something really important about how we are inundated with social media. Everything that we do is very public.
Mm-hmm.
If we make a mistake, it's very public.
Mm-hmm.
If we say the wrong thing, it's very public. Even if we do something that we think is right and somebody doesn't like it, it's very public. And that causes a lot of pain, anxiety, where it isn't just a mistake that nobody knows about or a few people know about it. The whole world, it feels the whole world knows about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is one of the key aspects that we discussed. I recently went to the Netherlands and discussed with a group of healthcare professionals the effects of social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the like, on mental health, and how it does affect your overall emotional health and your self image. Essentially, it does affect your cognitive health too, in the sense that it's very hard for people to pay attention, actually keeping attention, because they've been so used to just, sliding through the screen. So when it comes to how you engage yourself and how much social media you engage yourself in, you really have to take into account how much that will affect and influence your mental health and even your physical health. Because oftentimes when you overindulge in anything, it can become unhealthy for you. And so, and the internet is a large part of that.
Thank you. Bobby, I want to bring you into this, because now that Kendall's helped us frame what is this idea of mental health, and there are some emotional exercises that we can do, and there are trauma that we experience, I want to put it in the context of what we're talking about, and really the larger scope of Living Corporate and the Access Point. We're talking about mental health, particularly as it relates to work, right? And so we spend so much of our lives at work. Why is it so hard to maintain good mental health in the workplace? What is it that we're dealing with?
I believe we're dealing with massive change. There was a guy named Alvin Toffler. He was a futurist, and he wrote a couple of books. One was called Future Shock, and the other Third Wave. And basically, the rapidity of change in a society like ours is tremendous for lots of people. People want a slower pace, but the pace is quickened. And then plus, we through this change, we're now getting new lifestyles, new ways of working, living. Women don't have options now to have children, not have children. Uh, Couples get married. People can move around a lot more. They can choose careers. And so that begins to shape people's mental health from the standpoint of being more sure good at problem solving for themselves, or it finds those who are not good at that, and it can be great stressors in their life. And therefore, they come together at work because that's where we spend the core part of our time, daytime, is on a job and around a bunch of other people. So we either share or we resist sharing and we get caught up. And so our mental health is not always as stable as we would like for it to think.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I would also say that to what Bobby said about spending so much time at work, that it begins to mimic, people don't like to admit this, but a second home, because you do spend so much time there. And that's where you meet people. That's where you spend time with people. And so the expectation from folks is that you're going to get along. And when that doesn't take place, the change that occurs, whether it's at the relationship level, a decision that's being made that's going to impact the organization, those stressors show up. And for African Americans, it can have a greater impact, for many reasons. For many reasons. One is that some of the things you can express at home, you cannot express on the job for fear of stigma. And so you begin to behave in a way that protects you, and that might look like holding things in and not sharing anymore, and that turns to pressure.
I love this. So we're hearing that change is one of the factors that tampers with our mental health, and this pressure that builds up. I was reading an article in the Journal of Undergraduate Ethnography last week, and there's a study about Black people and mental health in the workspace. And this is one, and we're going to hit a nerve with this, but I want you to respond to this. One of the findings of this study is that it is difficult for Black people in white spaces, hear me, Black people in white spaces to maintain mental health because there are inhabitable, welcome spaces. Unpack that for me.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, that that it is hard for Black people in white spaces to maintain proper mental health because there are inhabitable welcome spaces. Unpack that for me.
So I honestly and truly agree with this statement. To unpack it, you really have to know America's history in the sense of the spaces that were created for Black people. And many times those spaces that were created by white men were not exactly the most welcoming of such. So many times with America, we oftentimes talk about this systematic racism, systematic injustices, meaning this is something that's ingrained within the system of how America overall operates. So if we're talking about from a corporate world in which it is pretty much led by predominantly white males and females, we're talking about the systematic, i.e. ingrained behaviors that they pretty much adopted and may have matriculated and changed as time has gone on, but it's still inflicted even within the workplace. I can honestly go back to what Dr. Edmonds was saying when she said, when you're at work, there's you can express, there's a way in which you're supposed to act, and there is even more of a microscope on you as a person of color within a space without any type of relatable or even relationship as far as ethnic backgrounds there for you. So even more so, you have to put on a certain face. And it can become very difficult to feel comfortable when you really cannot truly be yourself, because the people within your place and in your space honestly were never educated or even taught to accept who you were because of the fact of the nature of our nation's history. So I do believe that this statement is very much so true. And I do think that it is important for corporations to address that systematic area. And it is very much so a kind of painful hole to poke in because, America's supposed to be the land of the great. So we definitely don't want you to see our not so great stuff. But we want to make sure that we do address that because it's the not so great stuff that continues to create unhealthy environments and even oftentimes hostile environments for people, especially people of color, to feel comfortable and feel even more supported in the workspace.
So much for authenticity and bringing your authentic self to work, huh?
Yeah, I'd like to offer just a little bit there.
Go ahead.
Corporate space versus public space. Public working spaces is where you will find a lot of African Americans. In corporate spaces, you don't always find a lot of African Americans. And so when people show up, given the nature of white supremacy and the racism in our society, a lot of white people have informed viewpoints about Black people and who may have never really had any real friendships with an African American. So there become stresses. The key here, in order to survive and strive, that you have to have great communication skills. You have to be able to be a good listener, a very good listener, and also to be able to express yourself clearly. Because they do hear you when you express yourself. But what a lot of times people are expecting is what they see in the movies or they see in a comedy show. And they expecting you to behave that way. And I think the last thing is you can be your authentic self, but in being your authentic self, if you're going to stand and be accounted for, then you need to understand there will probably be a struggle that you'll have to manage while you're there working, producing high quality work.
So you mean I can't show up and show out?
That's right.
Yeah. But wait, but you already told me that it's stress. You told me that it's change. You told me it's a problem because it's Black people in the public space. And telling me I got to deal with it, but I can't show out the way I want to, the way that I see on the movies, the way I see on TV, the way they do in my home, the way I saw people do it behind me. My parents did it this way. My aunt did it this way. My grandmother did it this way. So we had to show up differently. I want to add something to this because I saw. Go ahead, Bob.
It's just called adaptation. If you ever saw the movie with Sidney Poitier and Mr. Tibbs, he knew how to adapt and be a strong Black person in dealing with those barriers or those challenges that you meet in dealing with white staff members or white bosses. It just means you can't, as the kids say, you can't do the chicken head thing. And you can't just cuss people out, but you.
Well, I'm in the wrong place.
You have to have a larger vocabulary in order to express exactly you feel your intentions, your anger, without being angry. What I mean by that, and not acting out to the point they think they need to call the police because they don't understand that.
Right.
So
that escalation can look different.
Yes, absolutely.
And I can honestly say that as a Black woman, that is a very big thing for me in the workplace. It's like anytime I go to address something, it's like, are you mad? And it's like, I'm not mad. Even if I assert myself, there's the automatic assumption that, angry Black woman is coming through. And if anyone who knows me, they know that I am like really a softie at heart. So I can completely understand that. And when people don't have an exposure or even knowledge of culture, period, when a person of any different culture walks in, those assumptions and stereotypes are automatically like put to work, like expecting you to be acting a certain way, looking a certain way. I oftentimes even think about even just with our names when it comes to just interviewing. I mean, my name is Kendall Peel, and oftentimes people think that I'm either a white woman or a white man. So it's very interesting to walk in and say, "Hello, yes, beautiful black girl magic is here for the interview." And they're like, "Oh no, we're looking for Kendall. That's me." So I can totally understand that. Yeah.
And so I want to stick with this idea about authenticity that Dr. Edmonds mentioned, and what you're saying now about adaptability and how do we show up in a space, because I read journals a lot, right? So another journal I was looking at last week is journal the Psychology of Women Quarterly. And there's a study in there talking specifically about this and about this idea of strong, independent Black women. And I know, Bobby, you mentioned in your intro that you worked in spaces where there are a lot of women, in public spaces. And what we're talking about here, Kendall, is in this study, what they find is there's a direct correlation to this idea of being the independent, strong Black woman who is Kendall Peel, who shows up not as the white man or the white woman, but the Black woman with all this Black girl magic. Direct correlation to psychological distress.
Oh, wow.
Direct
correlation?
That the tools we use to battle in these inhabitable welcome spaces have a direct correlation to psychological distress. Okay. How do we get around that?
Okay. Well, first, I can see that there's a correlation to psychological stress because essentially anytime that you have to do something outside of your comfort zone, it becomes a trigger for you. So you have some anxiety behind it. You have maybe even some worry behind what it is that you are doing. So when I have to come into an environment knowing who I am and being authentic in who I am, there could be a little bit of psychological distress associated with, okay, how much percentage of who I am should I give them? Because if I give them the full 100, we don't know if they're going to come back from it.
Yeah.
So there is some psychological distress or anxiety where you kind of start to overthink, overanalyze, even down to the myriad details of the colors of your shoes. Like everything becomes kind of obsessive for you because you start to focus on, well, what is it that I need to do to show that I can be a part of this team, instead of remembering that you are being recruited for it. So that means that you are bringing something to the team, and essentially you will meld a part of it overall. So there is psychological stress associated with that, especially when you feel that you have to come out of what you are used to doing and what you're comfortable with doing. Now I have to kind of keep things tight, keep it right. You know, it's kind of an actor not messing up the line during a live show. Like, okay, let me make sure I remember my lines, remember how I'm supposed to do this. There's some stress behind that because then the worry comes and the anxiety comes and the overthinking as well. And then oftentimes you'll bring that right on home with you. That's why they tell you leave work at work.
Leave work at work where it's unhealthy and it's stressful. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's a real good point she points out, that Kendall points out. But the one thing that I was thinking about as she was talking is that when you're in the workplace, what sometimes Black people forget is they never think about how they've always related to white people. So there can be a hierarchy in that relationship, which causes you that stress and gives you a mental health problem. And you find people taking mental health days to get themselves together because I can't deal with it. It's getting on my nerves. and so, because we like to think that we're very empowered, but many of us don't believe we're really, truly empowered. So when we go to work, we like the socialization aspect, but at the same time, we are nervous about our professional relationship in terms of the quality of our work or the environment, how people work. And I'm not used to working in that kind of environment, because when I work with Black people, we sort of talk to each other. We commiserate. Somebody could have a little song and they say, that reminds me of this song. Where in other communities, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And so we can definitely be harder on ourselves and create our own stressors and make ourselves feel not wanted, or that we must be looking poorly to our non-Black colleagues.
Thank you so much for that. I want to shift a little bit, keeping with this, but sort of move us into unpacking how we handle this. So there was an article in Forbes in April about this whole idea of mental health and burnout. And what they reported is 51% of employees do not feel comfortable talking to their bosses about this. 51%. Who's surprised, right? Wendy, Dr. Evans and I did a book last year called When Leadership Fails, where people told the stories of how they encountered terrible bosses at work and what they did to survive those. And we just finished doing an edition of a journal. Same thing, how people survive terrible bosses. So what we've been saying here is that communication is an issue, right? We've got to communicate the things that we need, that we know this is trauma informed, that we want people to come to the workplace and be authentic. But we know if you stand in this strong, independent stance, that's going to create psychological distress, and that there's an issue here with being empowered. But we know that empowerment comes from your boss most times. And if we know that 51% of people don't feel comfortable talking about their boss, what do we need to do to help organizations change what that looks like, and help employers and supervisors change the space for people, change these inhabitable welcome spaces? Dr. Edmonds, why don't you start for us?
That's going to take some time. That's going to take some time. People come to work with their own biases, and it's real to them. And because it's real to them, whatever you say, whatever you do, is going to feed into that. Yep, I told you that's how the Black people respond. Yes, that's how an angry Black woman starts off. So all of those preconceived ideas about what you may look like as a Black woman, angry Black woman, that's what they have in their mind. So how do you train people to come to work and leave those biases at home? It's constant work. It's not once a year online, click the button and you get your certificate at the end. And so businesses have to be intentional about how they're going to address.
You mean my badging isn't going to help me with this?
Right. You get a badge, where you click it. You can go through those trainings. Everyone's done it. And you just click it until you get the right one. And
I actually had somebody last week call me and say, how do they know if I'm cheating on this? What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah. It's not a good, and what that does is companies have to stop checking the box. Oh, we do have a training and it isn't effective. They're not even evaluating whether or not the training that's in place, that you click the box until you get it right, and then, like you said, you get a badge at the end, is working. What is noticeable is that the outcomes from not having the proper training, or that training really work, is what you see in the Black mental health. That's where you see stressors. That's where you see, like Bobby said, I got to take a mental health day, where they fear using the very resource that's available to them through their employer, which is the employee assistance program. And that's a fear. They might know, somebody might tell them. There's a fear of using that.
Oh, yeah, because when you click on it on the website, they're tracking you. That's it, right? That's the fear. They're tracking me when I email these people.
Yeah, and they don't want that. And so how do we do this? How do we get to the point where we're going to train organizations to do what's right. So we can go in and do that, but it's the evaluation piece and holding them accountable. It's just like checking the box by having just enough, especially in corporate America, just enough people of color to check the box. Now, no one ever says how uncomfortable, how do you feel? And I can give an example of my days in private industry where the microaggressions show up. And it goes back to what Kendall says, you're not going to code switch. You're going to be yourself. There's a price to pay for that. But when they're sitting around you, there's two African American men who were capable of leading a show. One of them was dark in complexion, who was the most knowledgeable, and the other one was light in complexion. And the choice was made by the people in the room who were white to use the one that was lighter in complexion because they said he was pleasing to the eye. So when you're in conversations and you're watching how decisions are made and how they're separating people of the same race, you take that in every day. You're dealing with this every single day. And so, yes, you do end up needing a mental health day. But companies have to do a better job. And we need to let them know that checking the box with your online training isn't working.
May I say something here? Because I
Please
think
do. Yeah.
Wendy comes up with a very, Dr. Emmons comes up with a very good point. The thing in the training aspect has always been to check the box and say we had this training, because then that meets the rules. And well, you can't sue us for being racist because we do these trainings and we train everybody. But it's the quality of the training. Things have to be very interactive. They has to have pre-reading, reading afterwards, and they have to be continuous throughout the work process. So people need to be ongoing with this, because what happens, the real situation is that people do not always know that they're using what they believe and been taught, how to choose the best or who's the better looking. And what they don't also understand, they can create a dynamic in their African American work population. Oh, they're only going to choose people who look that way. They're never going to choose us.
Yeah.
And so then that complicates the situation even further when corporate America or even in the public sector, they think they're doing the right thing. When in actuality, it has to deal with history. It has to deal with the American history in terms of race and how we felt about Africans. Because the one thing that is different from every ethnic group in this country, African people are the only people who do not speak their native languages that their ancestors came over with. The foods that we eat are not necessarily the foods that African ancestors have. So we copy and we do a lot more of how whites do things, or we believe that if I be this way, they're going to like me better. Or if I dress this way, they're going to like me more and they'll do something for me. Now, even though I'm giving them high quality work, then I have a greater chance of being accepted. But you read all the time about all those people, Black people with these advanced degrees, and they're suffering from serious mental health.
Suffering and suffocating. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there's been a couple books written about that. And so we need to be aware of those kinds of things in the workplace and how to get companies to do better.
Kendall, I want to bring you in this from this vantage point. In that same article that said 51% of employees don't even feel comfortable talking to their bosses about it, it said there are 4 things that organizations can create and that supervisors should be responsible and accountable for creating that can help with this. It said create meaning, create belonging, create leadership, and create support. So if you are someone who's listening to us have this conversation right now, talking about the struggles that it takes to your mental health impacted. I mean, to keep your mental health in shape. And you said this, you're thinking this might be an issue people at my workplace are dealing with. How do they begin to start doing these things? Create meaning, belonging, leadership, and support to help balance out the mental health challenges that people are dealing with in the workplace.
So, as far as the workplace is concerned, the main, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, the main, I guess you could say, purpose of the job is to conduct the job. So, they're going to really only address the things that really affect the overall goal or operation of the company. So, I say that to say, when it comes to the company providing meaning and knowledge and support, all of that honestly says to me is a safe place. Companies need to provide a safe place where employees can feel that they are able to be vulnerable, which is everyone's biggest fear these days, where you're able to be vulnerable and say to your boss candidly, here are the main issues that are affecting the overall productivity of work. I think oftentimes when we're talking about mental and emotional health in the workspace, it's kind of like trying to combine oil and vinegar because we've been kind of conditioned to not bring emotions or even mental, psychological, cognitive things outside of what the job specifically tells us to do. And this oftentimes is proven, just like you said, where 51% of people do not feel comfortable discussing it with their bosses because we've been conditioned to say, leave emotions out of work, work first, no emotions. But we really haven't taken into account that for us to work overall, it addresses the whole being. So to provide meaning, companies need to first start offering kind of open door policies. In my family, we have what's called RNC. So this is where I call it a real ninja conversation, basically. So
come on, this is the stuff Bobby said we shouldn't do at work. Go ahead.
Okay. So
Go
we
ahead.
have a real ninja conversation. I say, okay, we need to have an RNC. And so basically once or even twice a month, the whole family, we sit down at the table and we basically say, okay, gloves off, say what you want to say. Kids, if you want to curse, this is your time to curse.
What time are these meetings?
Oh, babe, best believe it's right after dinner and everybody's been fed and feeling well. But we've done that and we created kind of that space in the sense of this is a judgment-free zone where you can freely speak that what you're saying is being valued. So we're not sitting at the table like arguing with each other, you did this, you did this. We're sitting at the table discussing what is it that was done that's affecting your overall productivity. Like, what is it that I may have done to you that kept you from completing your homework or kept you feeling some type of way that you didn't go out or something? That's the same way we need to do in work, in the sense where we discuss what is it that our company is doing that's affecting the productivity of our employees. Are we not creating a safe space where our employees feel that they can truly express themselves culturally, ethnically? Are we not creating an open environment where an employee can feel comfortable with addressing with their employer, hey, I have these things going on mentally and emotionally, in the same way they would address with the employer had they been diagnosed with cancer or if they're going through some type of physical health crisis. It needs to be understood on that same level. But as Edmund says, it is going to take time, lots of time. So I would encourage you as the employee to come up with an entrance plan for work and an exit plan for work. So an entrance plan for work, you want to really have a plan as to how you're going to approach your day. Does that start with a meditation, reading your Bible, setting up your goals? For me personally, before I start any work day, I pray, listen to a little Erica Badu, spray a little sage spray, and then I write a to-do list of these are the main 3 things I want to do today. Okay, so I enter into work knowing as long as these main 3 things are cool, everything else I'm gonna be good with. Then you really want to think about an exit plan. What is your way of leaving work at work? Because oftentimes, because you spend so much time at work, you ultimately become work. Because it's like they say, if you ever look at older married couples over time, and there have been studies about this, the longer they're married, the more and more they start to look like each other. The longer they're married, the more and more behaviors they adopt from each other. This same thing happens with work. The longer and longer you are there, the more and more you become your job and who you are there.
Wait, Kendall, you telling me I'm about to start looking like an inhabitable welcome space? I don't understand.
You could. I mean, you could, Dr. Lonnie, if you don't have an exit plan. I mean, and you look mighty friendly. I would hate for you to be unhappy. I would hate for that to happen to you. But you could, you essentially could, if you do not have an plan, like leaving work at work. I honestly encourage my clients when they get home, before they walk into the door, they need to sit in their car, take 10 minutes, and you can either listen to one of your favorite songs, look at, a funny video, a funny meme, or, just breathe for a second and then enter your home. Because the thing about it is, if you're going straight from work straight into the house, you have yet to take a break in between to just be and separate those worlds. So ultimately, you end up enmeshing them all together. I know growing up for me, my father, he is one of the most hardest working men ever. One of the most hardest working men. He never took a sick day off. Never took a sick day off. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. Ever. They literally had to force him to retire. But the one thing about my dad is that he worked so hard that when he got home, he was exhausted. He was exhausted. And it's like, I completely, as kids, you don't really understand, well, why doesn't dad have time for me? Why are we doing things? And that's affecting and becoming a chain reaction in the other aspects of your life. So you want to make sure that you have an exit plan. How are you leaving work at work? For me, I make sure that as soon as I'm about to leave the office, I organize my things before I leave. I write myself a note for the next morning. And then that I do that I'm sure people will just completely shoot me over. But guys, I leave my work computer and phone right in that office.
There
I
you
do not
go.
take that thing home. I do not take it home.
And I love that, because you're what you're saying is we have to create the boundaries, but also bookends around it. It starts here and it stops here. So how do I want to enter it? How do I want to leave it?
Yes.
Dr. Edmonds, go ahead. What are your thoughts on creating meaning, belonging, leadership, and support?
I just want to actually, Kendall said it all. And I love the strategies that you put in place. I would be mindful of the workspace when you they will claim to create an environment that is a safe space for you to be authentic, and when you do, it turns to work.
Come on now.
Yeah.
Talk
You
about it.
have that?
Then now you're gonna be the chair of this committee.
Why don't you write that policy?
Oh yeah, they love
Yes.
that real quick. Oh, you got that.
Yeah, why don't
That's
you
it.
lead that effort?
You spoke so well about that.
Right.
Yeah.
So quick. Like I don't have enough work on my plate.
Right. So I would say be mindful of bringing your authentic self to work. Bring it and bring your strategies so that you don't take on the work because the company refuses for whatever reasons. And there are many why they don't do it and won't do it. And after the work is done, should you decide to do it, it won't get used. So point them in the direction of how an organization should lead the effort. Help them to be the leaders of that effort. It is not your responsibility to become the chair of that committee to write that policy.
That's correct. I would say to add to that, and I mean, I really love what you said, Kendall. That's really perfect. One of the things is, in being your authentic self, is not allowing yourself to become dichotomous in your brain, having a work face and then having a different kind of face when you get home or you get outside of work. Just be who you are, because in that process that people begin to split themselves in half. Like, this is who I am when I'm at work, and then when I leave work, this is who I am. But if you be your authentic self, as Dr. Emmons was saying, I think it helps you to stay whole. It helps you to do a lot of those things that you were saying, Kendall. And also, Wendy, it helps you to be strong in your voice to say, I'm glad you like my idea, but whoever is in charge of that area, I'll be glad to send my point of view to them, and they can
Come on
consider
now for the teamwork award. I'm gonna give you a badge for that.
The
you know.
dangers of code switching.
Congratulations.
Well, you can tell I had a lot of experience at that.
Yeah. So thank you all three of you for that. I wanna bring this up because it was in the news this week, and our fearless leader of Living Corporate responded to something on Twitter around this, Zach Nunn. So there's this idea floating around about quiet quitting. I don't know if any of you read anything about that. It was in Fortune this week. It was in something, the conversation in the UK. So it's this notion of when you are up against all these barriers we're talking about, all these impediments to healthy workspaces, this inhabitable welcome space, when you've got this fake me out safe space where you can be vulnerable, but then that becomes the work you have to do. That, and it's particularly salient with Gen Z, right? So quiet quitting, and it's sort of doing less work so you don't get burned out. Right. So intentionally pulling back from doing that. And this might be what you're talking about, Bobby, with some of this, the authentic selves, and deciding what face you want to play at work. So they're pushing this notion of it's okay for you to do less work to protect yourself from burning out, to protect yourself from this trauma induced on your mental health. Now, I've got a few questions about this, because one, it doesn't sound like a new idea at all. I think people have been playing around with doing less work at work for many years. It's not something new just happened this week. But I think there's also a black tax in that, right? There's a black tax. We aren't following the strategies that Kendall recommended and the things that Bobby's recommended. We aren't following those strategies of putting the bookends on our day and deciding how I want this day to look going into it and how I want to come out of it. If we start practicing the quiet quitting, we pay a black tax on that. So I want you, and Dr. Emmons, I want you to start here. What's the black tax that we have to pay for the quiet quitting? And what do we do instead of that? What's the strategy for us? Because we know the strategies that come out in some of the popular media don't always work for people who are in our spaces.
I know you deferred to me. I'm going to. I'm going to.
Wait,
I'm
you
going
saying
to
you
come
quiet
back.
quitting right now? You're not going to talk about it?
I'm going to come back to that, but I do want to defer to Bobby for this one.
Okay,
and then I'll come back.
A black tax while working less. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Quiet quitting.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people do that to preserve their well-being. And I think that it's really about, I think, dealing with distractions, doing the how you manage those. And I also think that if you find the right pace for working, you can do all of it. And what we have is a combination of people looking at work in very different ways. Being a baby boomer, I look at work a very different kind of way. My examples of people working hard, like Kendall was talking about a father. I have a father like that, and come home exhausted. He never went outside, played catch with me, and nothing. Okay, because he was exhausted. But at the same time, there's this other group, the Generation X group, and they deal with work in the world a different kind of way. And then there's the millennials and Generation Z who's about to come to work if they haven't started already. And so people view work very differently. And for some people, there's play in work, and that helps them to balance. But I think the most important thing is to maintain a healthy wellness with yourself, is knowing when to take those breaks as a diversion to allow you to think about something different. The brain responds to those kinds of interruptions, which allows you to come back and be good at ideas or additional problem solving or following through or finishing up in work. And I think the black tax would be on your health, your mental wellness, because you did not develop those kinds of things to help you throughout the workday.
I love that. I love that. Go ahead, Kendall.
So I honestly think that this quietly quitting is nothing but slow burnout. And I think a large part is that now we're in a place in which the dynamics of work are changing, in which it doesn't necessarily take 8 hours within a day to complete work. So now we're in the point of like, okay, well, I'll just do this for 2 hours, and then I'll do this over here, and I'll do this for another 2 hours. So I think that it's really important to just address, are you really balancing? It's kind of like portion control when you're eating. It's the same way in which you're working, in the sense, are you giving a time and portion to the task that you have so that you're still able to be effective at work, but still have the balance of that you should be doing, such as supporting your skills and doing things like honing in on new broad paths within work or new horizons and things that you want to pursue. So you want to make sure you have that like portion control and all those things, because as a millennial myself, I can say that one of the things that we love to say is like, this job is not worth my mental health.
Come on now. Speak on it.
This is
I
not
will
my worth my
quiet
mental
quit this
health.
piece in a minute.
Yes, okay. You know, my students love to say we're from the land of, mess around and find out. Like that is definitely their
Mess
mindset.
around out.
Like, and find out. Y'all can try to work me to death if you want to. So, we are very quick to like quit a job, and that's very see now, because we're going through the great resignation where there's all these jobs available and nobody's wanting to work because they have been overworked. There hasn't been a true addressing of, this is just how much time it takes to get the task done. Like, I feel like there's been so much stress and pressure on work. And essentially, if you look at other places within the world, like, for example, France, their work week is Monday through Thursday. They don't even do an 8-hour workday. Their workday is 5 hours. So, in that sense, okay. And even in South America, like Colombia, which is one of my favorite places to visit, in Colombia, the workday ends at 3 p.m. And then they even made it illegal for you to work on the weekends. Like, it is legit illegal for you to work unless you are an essential person, like who has to work in the grocery stores or things like that. But things of that nature. So it's definitely possible. It just has to do with us addressing the real reality of, this is how much time this work really truly takes, instead of just slowly burning out or quietly quitting. Just doing as less as we can within these hours, instead of just addressing the fact that, hey, I can get this done within these hours, and then I can just be about my way. I think that's why we see this huge surge in working from home and remote jobs, because people are starting to realize, like, oh my God, like, I can get this done in 2 hours, and then I can, go do my little workout or whatever.
Quality.
Right.
I don't have to put on that. I
life.
don't have to put on my fake face for the rest of the hours with these people.
But
think about this. Think about this. We have
Kendall is un-American with that viewpoint.
Oh.
That's fine. I'll take that. I will take that.
I'm like, hey.
So think about this. Think about this, you all. We have people of color who come from communities of color, and they're more likely to experience socioeconomic disparities, right? exclusions from health, educational, social, and economic resources. That's something that's beyond their control. And then they go to work, and in the work they are dealing with the uninhabitable workspace. It is easier to quit your job because you can't deal with that anymore. That crazy that shows up, the microaggressions, the racism, all that you encounter there, you can quietly quit that because it may be a little more difficult to move out of your community to live in a different space. But you do have choices to change that job, enjoy it, and get on your way. So it may look like the tax of your happiness and enjoyment is just that. It's the choice of, I'm going to quietly quit that job because that's easier than leaving my house.
And I love that. Go ahead, Bobby. Something else?
No, I mean, I was listening to Kendall, and then Wendy just chimed in, which is really a perfect connection. And the thing is that the American work life is based on the Protestant work ethic. And it is like you work and you work and you work till you can't work anymore. And so to not work at least 8 hours a day, when we're looking to be a very wealthy person, you need to work like the guy from Tesla says, you need to be working 80 hours a week. 80 hours a week. I mean,
while he's on his yacht.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I'm gonna tell you right now, I am quiet quitting that job already. I'm not even
Okay.
on
Okay.
Today.
That job ain't right my mental health, honey.
I mean, I think you're actually being a facility, if you keep doing that.
Yeah.
But this is how, what I was saying earlier, how the futurists are telling us the way of work, the way is changing, and it's changing so rapidly that we still stuck in a late 20th century of getting people to work the same way. And some companies, in order to deal with this change in work, if you're going to come to work and work for these 4 hours, I'm going to have cameras in there to make sure I can see everything you're doing for those 4 hours or those 8 hours that you're working. So now that's like a big brother thing. So people say, I don't want to work for you anymore. I'm going to find some place where I don't have to deal with that. And so we're caught up right now in leaving a old way of thinking and behaving to a better way where we get a greater productivity, but people get to enjoy their life and not wait to retire and say, I'm so exhausted, I retired, and then they're dead like within a year's time.
Yeah.
And that happens too often. And why should I have to wait till I'm 70 years old to retire? So these are some very serious things, and that's the biggest tax that people pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're gonna avoid paying this black tax on our mental health and emancipate ourselves from mental health slavery in the workplace, there's some things we've identified today that are really important. For the employee, for those of us who are in the workspace, we've got to be better at communicating what our needs are, identifying how we want those needs met in the workplace, that it is okay for us to show up authentically with our multiple authentic selves, that we aren't splitting in half, Bobby, but making sure that the whole person is served in that way. That we have to make sure, that if we are a supervisor or we're in a position where we can create things within the organization, that we are creating safe spaces for people to be vulnerable and allow them to tell you what's on their mind, the things that are not going well, the things that are impacting their productivity. That we also have to recognize that there is a link between your mental health and your physical health. And so if you are allowing this job to push you over a brink, that's going to impact you in a physical way. That it is okay to recognize that some people can view work or can create work in a way that it is like play. And that creates a different psychological experience and a different physical experience for us. And it is all right for you to take breaks and to find balance and to liken it to portion control and make sure that we have bookends around how we want our workday to begin, how we want our workday to end. From the organizational standpoint, we got to make sure we are not just checking off the number of people who took the survey and got the badge, but evaluating the outcomes. What happens with this, how people experience this space is much more important than just the number of people who took the training. That the training has to be impactful. People have to get involved in it and they have to understand what's happening. They have to feel changed and moved by it and be able to apply those things immediately. And again, evaluate what's happening in the job, that sometimes the job is designed around a 20th century work experience and it doesn't take that long to get that work done. Did I cover it all?
Ooh, you over here preaching, Dr. Mars.
Come on, man. We got it.
Somebody
We got it. We got it.
That's the head.
That's it. That's
right
how you
there.
avoid the black
Yes.
tax and mental health in the workspace.
That's right.
I
Let's
appreciate
take
all
that
of
to
you.
corporate right now.
Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope that you'll come back to join us in our next talk next week. Thank you so much, Kendall Peel, for your expertise and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Bobby Frazier, for coming out of retirement to talk to us tonight and help us understand and unpack these. Everybody else, Dr. Edmonds, you are always a shining star on this show with me. If you want to connect with Living Corporate, here's how you can find us. On the web, we are at livingcorporate.tv. On Twitter, we are at livingcorp_pod. On LinkedIn is Living Corporate. On Instagram, we are at Living Corporate. Everybody have a good night. See you next time.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Living Corporate is brought to you by Doximity. Doximity is committed to fostering an inclusive and diverse work environment where differences are valued, practices are equitable, and employees experience a sense of belonging that allows them to bring their full, authentic selves daily. As medicine's largest network, there's an elevated level of responsibility to everything we do. We don't take that responsibility lightly and are committed to working towards a more equitable world inside and beyond our virtual office walls. So if you want to learn more about Doximity, go to your app store and type in DOXIMITY. Again, that's DOXIMITY.